Gnostic Anthropology by Samael Aun Weor, Part 2. Chapter 4. First of all, it is good to know that anthropologists speak to us about three very important epochs. First, the Paleozoic era, second, the Mesozoic era, and third, the Cenozoic era. They emphatically affirm that during the Paleozoic era the first unicellular beings, the microorganisms, the molluscoids, the mollusks, the fish, and the first reptiles were in the waters of life. This is affirmed with incredible conviction by the materialistic anthropologists as if they were present in those archaic epochs, as if they saw, smelled, touched, and even heard all of that which occurred in those ages. Nonetheless, as I have already stated in previous chapters, the anthropologists from materialism always asseverate that they only believe in what they can see. They state that they will never accept anything that they have not seen with their eyes or touched with their hands. Although I have reiterated this statement many times, I have to repeat that such an affirmation is absurd, completely false, since they believe in what they have never seen. They affirm in an absolutist way their false suppositions. When did they see the primary epoch? When were they present during the Paleozoic era? Did they live during the Mesozoic era? Did they perchance exist during the Cenozoic era? They affirm mere hypotheses that they have never witnessed. They affirm what they have never seen. Nonetheless, they believe themselves to be eminently practical. They have never seen the Paleozoic era. What do they know about it? What do they know of the life forms that existed in that first age, and about the events of that archaic epoch of our world? They also talk about the Mesozoic era, the epoch of the great antediluvian reptiles. We do not deny that the reptiles existed on the earth. It is clear that the epoch of reptiles existed, that is a fact. Our earth was populated by enormous reptiles, this is undeniable. Let us remember the Brontosaurus or Brontosaurus, the Plesiosaurus, the pterodactyl, etc. All of those were indeed gigantic, enormous monsters that were 1 or even 2 street blocks in size. They existed, however. It is very difficult for the ladies and gentlemen of false science to have ever seen all of those reptiles from the Mesozoic era. How did those dinosaurs live? How did those dinosaurs reproduce themselves? Were the ladies and gentlemen of false science witnesses of it? The Cenozoic era followed. It is stated that many reptiles evolved towards the state of mammals. It is asseverated that from the primates came the hominids, which are the ancestors of the intellectual animal mistakenly called a human being. There is no doubt, state the ladies and gentlemen of false science, that the hominids were born of the primates, which gave origin to the human being, and also gave origin to the branch of great gorillas or chimpanzees, etc. When they talk like this, they practically use Darwin as their base. However, we know very well that Darwin did not state in any way that the human being came from the ape. He only clarifies that the human being and the ape have a common ancestor. Nevertheless, the materialistic anthropologists state that their common ancestors are the primates. They state that the first hominids were born of the primates as well as the great apes from ancient epochs, from the period that we call Cenozoic. This is how they arrange their theories so that these can coincide with Darwin's statements in some way. Yet, did those primates exist by chance? Have the materialistic anthropologists ever seen, at any time, the first hominids? Can they swear that from the hominids were born the gigantic apes on one side and the human beings on the other? Can they affirm that from the primates the hominids were born and that these are the ancestors of the human being? Can they dare state that from those primates, all of the species of gigantic gorillas and chimpanzees which populated the face of the earth in archaic epochs were also born? What do the ladies and gentlemen of materialism know about this? On the other hand, as usual with his theories, Haeckel assigned about 17 or 18 genealogies onto the present humanoids. He states that these genealogies come from marsupials or mammals. He states this theory with so much conviction as if he himself had indeed witnessed it. Haeckel and his partisans believe in phantasmagoric utopianisms of the mind that cannot be demonstrated. The mammals, the marsupials, and all of those genealogies from Haeckel are extremely absurd. Amongst those genealogies, the anthropologists do not discard the famous lemurs with a discoid placenta. Yet, where is this placenta of the lemurs? In these present times, they affirm that we come from the lemur. Other certain pseudosapient anthropologists, who allege that our ancestor is the mouse, do not go unnoticed either. Frankly, the materialistic scientists of this epoch have dedicated themselves to too much research. Their boasted materialistic culture from this century is indeed shameful. First they have us descending from the lemur, then all of a sudden from Brother Mouse. Through ancient traditions we know very well that the human race was formed by the giants of Atlantis, of Lemuria, of the Hyperborean epoch, and of the Polar. Yet, an excessive amount of ignorance has to exist in order to establish such theories that allege that we descended from the mouse, since in Atlantis the same mouse was not as small as it is in this day and age. To state that the human being was tiny and that he kept on growing, that his stature was so small because he is a child of the mouse, is frightfully ludicrous in depth. We can see how these cynical anthropologists from materialism act. One minute they are stating that we come from primates, then, all of a sudden they are stating another thing. When they get tired with Brother Mouse, they then appeal to the mandrill, based on the fact that this poor primate has red buttocks. Alas, these pseudo-anthropologists are so ignorant. These pseudo-anthropologists are the ones who have precipitated this world towards the path of devolution and degeneration. They are the ones who are corrupting this humanity, the ones who are depriving people of their principles and the eternal values of their spirit. When the eternal values of the spirit are taken away from the human being, he then frightfully degenerates. These pseudo-anthropologists are the ones who send their partisans, those scoundrels of materialism, to teach all of their nonsensical theories to the people of the villages. They are the ones who have converted themselves into the instructors of the wretched people who live in those villages. We can consider these pseudo-anthropologists the corruptors of minorities, since with their display of fallacies they corrupt the simple individuals of the villages. They are the ones who harm the minds of people. They are the ones who structure educational plans, eliminating all of that which has the flavor of spirituality. Nonetheless, they do not have enough of a foundation to pronounce themselves against the mystical teachings of humanity. It is abundantly ludicrous to asseverate in any given moment that we come from the mandrill or from the mouse or from the first primates of the Cenozoic era. The materialistic ladies and gentlemen from the north or from the south or from any of the different countries of the earth laugh about the Father Manu from whom the entire human race came forth. They laugh about the Dayan Chohan, who seems to be a utopian personage to them. Yet, they do not have any trouble believing in the fallacy of Haeckel. They believe in Haeckel's stupid pithecanthropoid with a speaking capacity that is 1,000 times more fantastic than the assertion of Manu or Dayan Chohan. Despite the ignorance of materialistic anthropology, humanity still believes in the Dayan Chohan, even when these illustrious materialistic anthropologists are upset about it. Still millions of people in the world accept the Father Manu. People from Asia believe in him. The Father Manu is the man-spirit. He is the prototype man who is placed in a very superior level of the being. Indeed, if we could perform retrospective investigations with procedures very much different from those of carbon-14 or potassium-argon, then we would discover that truly, the prototypes of this humanity come from the superior dimensions of nature and the cosmos. We have to judiciously analyze what this present materialistic culture that serves as a foundation for countries and nations actually is. We must search for the origin of all this corruption and all this perversity. It is not possible for this humanity to continue being a victim of ignorance. To agree with their theoretical nonsense is 100% absurd. To state that those lemurs, those small animals with very enlivened eyes, had placentas and that they could be considered as one of our ancestors is an absurdity. It is an unforgivable zoological mistake, because lemurs never had placentas. Indeed, Haeckel has harmed society a great deal. This is why we once stated, as a parody to Job the prophet, "Let the memory of him be forgotten by humanity, neither let his name be uttered in the streets." The science of embryogenesis was unknown in the epoch of Haeckel. This is why he dared to speak about lemurs with placentas. His statements were indeed incongruent. When one investigates these things, one feels nothing more than repugnance for the school of materialism that is presently corrupting our culture. Schools of materialism are currently taking away the eternal values from this present culture. They are precipitating our society onto the path of perdition. Which indeed is the ancestor of the human being from the Cenozoic era? Which are the ancestors of the Paleolithic human being, and which are his descendants? Did Darwin ever meet them? Did Haeckel or Huxley ever meet them? What does materialistic anthropology base itself upon in order to speak with so much authority about Homo sapiens, the primordial man? To which epoch does Homo sapiens belong? Intending to find the fossil remnants of the primordial man, Huxley searched within the subterranean layers of the Quaternary period, yet he searched in vain since these fossil remnants were never found. That is because the human being is more ancient than what the pigs of materialism suppose. The human being existed during the Cenozoic period, as well as in the Mesozoic period and in the Paleozoic period. The former statement will not be accepted by the materialists. They want the human being to come strictly from the Quaternary period, and in no way will they admit that the human being existed during the Cenozoic era. The moment has arrived for us to delve deeply and reflect, to have a maximum analysis. What do the pseudo-anthropologists know about life? What do they know about the processes of life during the primary, secondary, tertiary, and quaternary periods? Indeed, conventional anthropology is a building without a foundation. Just observe all human beings with their monads, and we will see how the whole little theater of Haeckel, Darwin, Huxley, Marx, and their partisans would fall to the floor and be made dust. I stated in my third chapter about the navel of the universe. What? Our planet Earth has a navel. Why not? When we are born, when we come into the world, we also come with a navel. As is the macrocosm, so also is the microcosm, as above, so below. In the previous chapter one commented about the Omeoken. But, what is the Omeoken? The Omeoken is nothing more than the navel of the universe. The Earth-Moon existed in a foregone cosmic day. The moon had seas and mountains filled with life and vegetation. Moreover, it also had its Paleozoic, Mesozoic, and Cenozoic eras. All the worlds that are, have been, and shall be, are born, grow, get old, and die. The moon is a dead, cosmic corpse. This has been demonstrated by the astronauts who descended upon the lunar ground. However, lunar life in itself, the living substance of matter, did not die. It continued processing itself in the fourth coordinate, in the fourth vertical, along with all of the seeds of all things existent. Later on, that living substance processed itself within a fifth coordinate, then within a sixth, and subsequently within a seventh. When that living substance immersed itself into the seventh, then it submerged itself within the bosom of the abstract absolute space. That homogeneous living substance, that Mula Prakriti of Eastern people, that primordial earth, continued to exist. That living substance was a seed that could not be lost, therefore it was deposited within profound space. Thus, life continued to exist, yet in a dormant way within that seed. That seed, the living substance, slept for 7 eternities within the chaos. To be more specific, this living substance slept for 7 eternities within profound space. Much later, the electric whirl, the electric hurricane, the darkness, and the wind, as it is stated by the people of Anahuac, made that primeval world, that primordial earth called Iliaster, inhabited. Then the two functioned with its opposites, positives and negatives, masculine and feminine. The chaos emerged from that Iliaster. The sleeping living substance awoke. This is why it is stated that the hurricane, the tempests, and the darkness prevailed within the Omeoken, Yoaliehecatl. Yoaliehecatl is the god of the wind, of the hurricanes, of the electric movement. Yoaliehecatl is the macrocosm endowed within the microcosm. Everything is in incessant activity. This is how the chaos is. It existed within the Omeoken. The chaos was the Omeoken itself. Nonetheless, all of the possibilities will abide there until the wholeness can make the chaos fecund. So, when the wholeness made the chaos fecund, then the limbus, that extraordinary limbus, gave origin to all that is, was, and shall be. Since then, from the navel of the universe and throughout many dimensions, there were successive unfolded manifestations. Thus, evolving and devolving life passed through many dimensions. The merely germinal human being passed into the protoplasm and finally crystallized in the protoplasmic earth. The first manifestation was in the world of the mind, in the region of the cosmic mind, the universal intelligence. The second manifestation of all that is, has been, and shall ever be manifested itself in the second period. Then, as an outcome of the second, a third manifestation appeared in an ulterior dimension. Therefore, before life appeared in this physical world, it developed and involuted in three superior, extraordinary dimensions. It is obvious that before life appeared upon our protoplasmic world, a creature very similar to any mammal or to any simian, yet indeed very different from apes, appeared from the species of animals. When the original or primordial human being achieved crystallization in a dense form, he then passed through a transformation in his morphology and appeared in the northern polar cap that in an aforementioned time was situated in the equatorial zone. In my next chapter 1 we'll talk about the movements of the continents. We will factually tell the world what Pangaea is. Now, we will only limit ourselves to state that before life became crystallized in the physical world, life was already developed in other dimensions. However, I want to emphasize the following statement. The real human being existed in the first, second, and third root races, prior to the existence of the intellectual animal mistakenly called a human being. The intellectual animal, the one who appeared in the quaternary period, is by no means a human being, but an intellectual animal. In my former chapter, I stated that in Lemuria the real human beings lived splendidly, yet some of them degenerated at the end of their epoch, thus, they sexually mixed themselves with beasts. This present humanity is the outcome of that sexual mixture. The result is the intellectual animal. This is the moment to understand these very delicate matters, to understand that the human being is prior to the quaternary, tertiary, secondary, and primary periods. Proof of this is that even though all of the living species of archaic times disappeared, the human being, or better said, the humanoid, continues to exist. The intellectual animal mistakenly called a human being was capable of surviving in spite of many storms, in spite of the revolution of the axis of the earth, in spite of the events of Pangaea. If the animals, the reptiles, etc. from other Mesozoic periods were capable of surviving, then this shows us that the human being is prior to all of these periods that have been designed by materialistic anthropologists. We must profoundly and seriously reflect upon the Gnostic anthropological studies. Endow the intellectual animal with a monad, which is that spiritual entity of which all the partisans of Darwin, Haeckel, and Huxley have intended to deprive us, and we will see how their materialistic circus will definitely fall. These are the times to unmask materialistic anthropology. It is the moment to restore the eternal spiritual values to humanity. Chapter 5. There are facts, cosmic and geological events, that are worth studying in these treatises of Gnostic anthropology. There is no doubt that Gnostic scientific anthropology unveils all veils related with the origin of the human being and the universe. Obviously, the mechanism of nature is portentous. However, we Gnostics will never accept the possibility of mathematics without a mathematician or a mechanism without mechanics. Gnostics do not want to defend an anthropomorphic God according to the doctrine of the Judaic Jehovah, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. We know very well that such dogmatism brings as a consequence or corollary and by opposition the materialistic reaction expressed by all type of atheists. It is necessary to understand that any type of abuse is harmful for humanity. In ancient times people rendered worship to the gods, that is to say, to the intelligent principles of nature and the cosmos, to the demiurge architect of the universe. The demiurge architect of the universe is not a human or divine individual. Rather, it is multiple perfect unity, the Platonic Logos. Unfortunately, in the august Rome of the Caesars and even in ancient Greece a type of religious degeneration occurred. When they abused worship of the gods, then as a reaction monotheism with an anthropomorphic god emerged. Later, that monotheism with its anthropomorphic god produced as a reaction modern materialism. Therefore, the abuse of polytheism brings as a consequence monotheistic anthropomorphism, that is, the belief in a biblical anthropomorphic God. On the other hand, through time the abuse of monotheism originated materialistic atheism. These are the religious phases through which people always pass. Frankly, in the name of truth, I consider that the moment has arrived in order to eliminate that monotheistic anthropomorphism that has originated very harmful consequences. If the religious clergies would not have abused that worship, then modern materialistic atheism would not exist. So, monotheistic worship emerged as a reaction. Unfortunately, materialistic atheism was also born as a reaction against monotheistic anthropomorphism. Likewise, the belief in an anthropomorphic God is the outcome of the abuse of polytheism. Again, when the worship of the gods of the universe is abused, then by simple reaction the outcome is monotheism. Nevertheless, we need to recognize the intelligent principles of nature and the cosmos. But, I repeat, we are not defending an anthropomorphic God. It seems, by all means, that the recognition of intelligent principles can be shown through many scientific analyses. Let us observe, for instance, an anthill. There, we see the intelligent principles in complete activity. We see how those ants work, how they build their palaces, how they govern themselves, etc. The same happens with a beehive. Their organization is astonishing. Let us endow each one of the ants or each one of the bees with a Pythagorean monad or with a Hindustani jiva, and it is logical that, as a fact, the whole anthill or the whole beehive will make sense, because all of the creatures live through a monadic principle. Thus, Haeckel, Darwin, and Huxley's materialism would become completely destroyed in the face of this concept. We are not rendering cult to any anthropomorphic God. We only want to point out that intelligence must be recognized in nature. It is not absurd for us to recognize that nature is endowed with intelligence. The order that is there in the construction of a molecule or of an atom shows us the intelligent principles with complete, absolute clarity. We are in the appropriate epoch in order to revise these principles. If we disagree with materialism, it is because it does not resist an in-depth analysis. Obviously, materialism is total garbage. The creation of the human being through mechanical processes is more incongruent than the belief of the creation of the biblical Adam who instantaneously emerged from the clay of the earth. However, the first belief is as absurd as the second one. Both are incongruent. We Gnostics recognize that there is intelligence in the whole mechanism of nature. There is intelligence in the movement of the atoms around their gravitational center, in the movement of the planets around their suns. It is true, no lie, certain, that our sun, the one that illuminates and gives life to us, is one of the suns of that great constellation that rotates around Alcyone. Since ancient times this constellation has been called the Pleiades. There are 7 suns that rotate around Alcyone. This is not strange. We live in a corner of the Pleiades, on a small planet that rotates around the sun, a planet that is populated by intellectual animals, a very small world that we named Earth. Generally, each of the suns from the Pleiades, each of those 7 suns, gives life to the corresponding planets that rotate around it. It is true, we do not deny it, our planet Earth is a small world that rotates around the 7th sun of the Pleiades. It is no less true that the Pleiades need an intelligent directrix principle. Naturally, the pigs of materialism only believe in the fat and in the lard. Materialists are eager to reduce the wretched 3-centered or 3-brained biped to a simple productive and consuming tridimensional machine. The materialists want to deprive humanity of its intelligent principles. By their own whim they want to deprive the whole human mentality of their eternal values, the values of their being. We comprehend perfectly that when humanity is deprived of the values of their being, then it frightfully degenerates. This is what is happening in these moments of world crisis and bankruptcy of principles. The know-it-all ignoramuses of materialistic anthropology are obstinately precipitating the wretched people of this century onto the path of the most obvious perdition. The Pleiades need a directrix principle. However, in order not to fall into anthropomorphism this time, it is better that we state what the directrix principles are, because anthropomorphism has been very fatal due to the fact that it produces materialistic atheism. Anyhow, the directrix principle of the Pleiades is plural, yet it has a representation that in no way would the pigs of materialism accept. I want to refer to the equatorial astral sun of the Pleiades. This sun is invisible through the lenses of our telescopes, yet it is visible for those who have developed the most extraordinary type of vision. This is the intuitive prajnaparamita type of vision in its more elevated degree. The term prajnaparamita is abundantly difficult, since it is Sanskrit and it is unacceptable for atheistic anthropology, yet it is real in its transcendence for true human beings. The equatorial sun of the Pleiades intelligently coordinates all of the cosmic, human, plant, animal, and mineral labors and activities. It coordinates even this group of celestial bodies known as the Pleiades. Indeed, the equatorial sun is the sum of intelligent principles that the partisans of materialism abhor. Yet, the world is a world and will always be. Materialism always produces degeneration of the brain and the mind, devolution of the human principles, total decadency, and incapacity for the development of the objective reasoning of the being. The Pleiades with their sun constitute a beautiful panorama of the universe. The sun of the Pleiades is not a visible sun, it is the astral sun located in the fifth coordinate. If we, the Gnostics, would accept but only 3 coordinates, if we were bottled up within the 3-dimensional geometry of Euclid, then we would be enemies of the Eternal One, just like the materialistic atheists who are like donkeys that only believe in the grass they see. The intelligent principles of that astral sun maintain the Pleiades in perfect harmony. This is something that we do not ignore since we have methods and procedures for the development of certain transcendental faculties of the being that allow us to see beyond the simple telescopes and allow us to penetrate beyond the microscope. We must take into account not only the Pleiades, but the whole galaxy in which we exist. This great galaxy, the Milky Way, has a capital, which is the sun Sirius. 100 billion suns, millions of worlds, moons, and meteorites are controlled by Sirius in an extraordinary way. Unquestionably, the sun Sirius is gigantic. Close to Sirius there is a moon that is 5,000 times denser than lead. That moon rotates around Sirius. Extraordinary radiations come from Sirius that affect cosmic matter. Yet, we must not deny that from that moon 5,000 times denser than lead also emerge terribly human vibrations. It can be stated that the radiations of Sirius affect all of the superheavens of any cosmic unit. On the other hand, the tenebrous infraradiations of the satellite that surrounds it affect the infrainfernos that produce chaotic states in the mentality of human creatures. It engenders materialistic atheism, etc. The galaxy in itself, the Milky Way, with all of its extraordinary organization, with its spiral shape, has the sun Sirius as its capital. Undoubtedly, the Milky Way needs the intelligent principles that govern it. The polar sun comes into our memory right now. Obviously, in the polar sun are the intelligent principles that wisely control, govern, and coordinate this galaxy in which we live, move, and have our being. It is related to a marvelous spiritual sun that completely directs the whole Milky Way. Obviously, without the intelligent principles of the polar sun, even when the whole of this galaxy is controlled by its capital star Sirius, and even when it would be intelligently governed, something would be lacking from it. It would lack the intelligence of the spiritual sun or of the polar sun that is the very foundation of all of those intelligent principles of the Milky Way. Still, the whole matter does not end here. We have to go far beyond that. Einstein already stated, the infinite has a limit. He also asseverated that the infinite is curved. There is no doubt that there are many infinities. Beyond this infinite, there is another infinite, and much further beyond, there are many empty spaces between infinite and infinite. There is no limit to the many infinities. Our infinite, the infinite of Einstein, has around 100,000 galaxies. Each one has approximately 100,000 suns, and millions of corresponding worlds. This is what is possible to perceive through telescopes. Yet, indeed, this infinite in which we live needs intelligent sovereign principles that coordinate it in order to avoid many types of collisions and failures, as much as possible. Fortunately, the central sun exists, the sacred absolute Sunday. The intelligent directrix principles of this infinite are within this sacred absolute sun. Within it, I repeat, we live, move, and have our being. Intelligence governs the whole cosmos, whether it is within the infinitely small or within the infinitely large. There is intelligence in the macrocosm and in the microcosm, in a system of worlds, in a beehive, or in an anthill. Cosmic intelligence abides precisely in each particle of this great creation. We live here, as we have already stated, on a small planet from this infinite universe, in a minute world that rotates around the seventh sun of the Pleiades that has its mechanism governed by intelligent principles. Unquestionably, the geologists who have studied a lot do not know about the living mechanism of this planet Earth. The belief that the continents on which we exist are fixed, firm, and immovable has always existed, but that concept is mistaken. We, the Gnostic scientists, know very well that the Earth is more similar to the structure of an egg than to a firm mass. If we open a bird's egg and observe it, we will then see that it has a yolk that is movable and that it sustains itself over the egg white. The same happens with the Earth. The continents are similar to the yolk. These continents sustain themselves over a clear, pasty, fluidic, and gelatinous substance. This continental yolk is not static. It periodically moves and rotates over its own axis. The entire continents of America and Europe were once connected and now they are separated. This is what the materialistic anthropologists state about Pangaea. Yet, they ignore the rhythms, periodic movements, and true geological history. There is an abundant amount of proof in order to demonstrate the movement of the continental masses. Once, Atlantis was in the ocean that bears its own name. The followers of materialism have placed a question mark about the existence of this continent. Nonetheless, Atlantis' existence has been duly demonstrated in a conclusive way by the true sages that from time to time have appeared upon the earth. The learned ignoramuses stubbornly assert that continents sank like a milk layer sinks, yet that is absurd. Atlantis sank as a consequence of the revolutions of the axis of the earth. Yet, the materialistic addicts do not know this. The Atlantean catastrophe left our present continents in a very bad situation. Observe the continent of the Americas and you will see that from the side of the Pacific Ocean, the Americas incline as if they want to sink into the ocean, while on the eastern side they rise. This is similar to when a boat is sinking. It never sinks vertically, but always on one side. The very Andes mountain range inclines towards the Pacific Ocean. Let us see Europe. There is no doubt that it wants to sink into the Mediterranean. It is more submerged towards its profundity. The same happens with Germany and Russia. The Asiatic continent is inclined as if it wants to sink into the Indian Ocean. The continents were left damaged because of the great Atlantean catastrophe, which unbalanced the geological formation of our world. We have spoken a lot about suns and catastrophes and about many such things. Yet, the sons of Anahuac, from the Aztec calendar, invite us to reflect because these are very interesting, namely the son of fire, the son of air, the son of water, and the son of earth. These sons mark terrible cosmic catastrophes. It is stated that the children of the first sun, the protoplasmic root race, perished when they were devoured by tigers. The tiger is a symbol of wisdom, this is clear. It is stated that the children of the second sun, the Hyperborean root race, perished when they were demolished by strong hurricanes. This is in reference to that humanity who lived on that horseshoe-shaped land that is around the North Pole. It is affirmed that the children of the third sun, the Lemurian root race, perished by the sun of raining fire and great earthquakes. The children of the fourth sun, the Atlantean root race, perished by the waters. The children of the fifth sun, the Aryan root race, we, the people of this epoch, will perish by fire and earthquakes. The children of the sixth sun, the Karate root race who will inhabit the future earth of tomorrow, will also perish. After having spoken to you about the sons of Anahuac, we will now pass into a minor cycle. Naturally, there are always primary, secondary, tertiary, and quaternary ages. We will not base these ages on the 5 root races that existed. This time we will base them on something distinct. We will base them precisely on the movements that the terrestrial yoke undergoes. We will base them on that geological movement that is processed periodically upon its own axis, on the movement of the continents over that pasty and gelatinous substance. So, from the former points of view we can talk about the primary, secondary, tertiary, and quaternary ages. Likewise, we can talk about the Eocene, a primary period unknown to people, Eocene, Miocene, and Pliocene. We do not deny that among these types of catastrophes there have been other catastrophes also, like the terrible glaciations. Atlantis marks the end of the Tertiary epoch, at the end of Atlantis to be more specific. So, that Tertiary epoch was very beautiful because of its Edens, it was delectable because of its great paradises. Many glaciations have occurred, and there is no doubt that we are approaching another glaciation. There are catastrophes caused by the verticalization of the axis of the Earth, caused by the verticalization of the poles of the world. There are catastrophes that are the outcome of the movements of the continents, and then earthquakes occur, followed by the start of glaciations. 5 glaciations are mentioned that were processed in accordance with the movements of the continents. Yet, we must know that glaciations have also been produced because of the verticalization of the poles of the Earth. It is obvious that the catastrophes in glaciations are multiple. If we were to state that the human being did not exist during the Miocene, Pliocene, and Eocene epochs, we would be asseverating something false. It is remarkable to see that while the archaic species of animals were extinguished, the human being nonetheless continued to exist. I am mentioning the word human being in a merely conventional sense, since we already know that the intellectual animal is not a true human being. Obviously, when speaking of people, we have to describe them in some way. Terrible changes have occurred, yes, they have. Let us think about the human race that emerged from the Eocene, with their tropical weather. Likewise, let us think about that race that developed and unfolded during the Oligocene, with its mild temperature. Finally, let us think about that race who lived in the Miocene, with its cold weather, with temperatures so low they were approaching the last glaciations. What is fascinating is that in spite of so many glaciations and catastrophes, human beings continue to exist. The Paleolithic human being still exists, incredible, yet it is true. All of the species of archaic animals disappeared, the enormous reptiles of the Mesozoic, and nonetheless, human beings continue to exist. How is this possible? How is it that all of the archaic creatures have died and the human beings are still alive? The primary, secondary, and tertiary epochs passed by and still we see human beings walking on the streets. This gives us enough authority in order to tell Darwin, Huxley, and Haeckel, who with their materialistic theories exercised too much damage upon humanity, that the human being existed a long time before the Paleolithic era. In the 3rd chapter one commented about the navel of the universe, about the Omeokon. I then compared it to the cosmic seed from which this planet was born. It is clear that before the Earth could physically exist, the Omeokon developed itself in various dimensions. I want to state that within the Omeokon, the navel of the world, the whole planet was gestated. This planet passed through various periods of activity in diverse dimensions before crystallizing in the present physical form. The human being as a seed was developed from the Omeokon and began crystallizing little by little through diverse dimensions until finally taking on physical form in the polar epoch. Here we are stating subject matters that upset the materialists. They say they only believe in what they see. Nonetheless, they believe in all of their utopias. They are searching for the primordial human being within the subterranean layers of the Quaternary period. Each day they invent more and more theories, and they believe them without ever verifying them. They are going around uttering lies. They believe in what they do not see, therefore they are falsifiers. We can prove what we are stating. We have systems of investigation by means of the technique of meditation. Through meditation we can develop certain faculties, such as prajnaparamita, a type of intuition which allows us to study the Akashic records of nature. The whole history of the earth and of its races is found in those records. If the pigs of materialism would leave their fanatical attitude and resolve themselves to enter into the Gnostic disciplines, then they would develop certain faculties which will grant them access to the history of the earth and of its races. The hour has arrived in which each one of us must reflect upon ourselves and the universe. The human being existed upon the earth far beyond the primary era, much prior to the Paleolithic era. The concrete fact that we continue to exist in spite of the fact that the animals of foregone times have disappeared in their majority gives us the right to affirm the former statements. So if the former statements are a fact, then we have the right to state that we are as ancient as the earth itself, as nature itself. Facts are facts, and before the facts we have to surrender. If we have not perished, if we have not disappeared from the scenario of the world in spite of so many catastrophes, if we have not disappeared even though the creatures from the Mesozoic times are extinct, then this gives us the authority to state that we are very special beings. We existed on the earth before the creatures of the Pliocene or of the Mesozoic times ever appeared upon the face of the earth. This right is given to us by the fact of existing, by the concrete fact that eternities have passed and we still continue to exist. The contemporaneous creatures died and nonetheless we are still alive. All of them perished, yet we continue to exist. Therefore, we have a basis in order to laugh in the faces of Huxley, Darwin, and Haeckel, personages who were lethal for humanity. The different scenarios in which this humanity has developed deserve to be studied and to be kept in mind. How marvelous and wise are the Nawa's sons! They not only contemplate the root race who was devoured by the tigers of sapience, they also contemplate the Hyperboreans who were demolished by the strong hurricanes, the Lemurians who perished by the sun of raining fire and great earthquakes, and the Atlanteans who perished by the waters. These Nawa's sons go further. They contemplate those movements of the yolk over the egg white. In other words, they contemplate the periodic movements of these continents that suddenly split or diverge, and then suddenly produce great glaciations where all life perishes, and then all of a sudden, they originate new activities. These Nawa's sons work throughout the tertiary, secondary, and primary periods. Finally, every period of 52 years, they are elevated in the changes of fire. We are now in the fifth of those changes, the fifth sun. The secret doctrine of Anahuac contains precious treasures that the enemies of the sacred land of Anahuac, the anthropologists of the atheistic materialism, would never accept. Chapter 6. Unquestionably, this terrestrial humanity has passed through diverse phases of development. This is something that we have to judiciously analyze. Intellectuals speak frequently about the mechanical evolution of nature, the human being, and the cosmos. Gnostics have comprehended that from the anthropological point of view, there are two types of evolution. Obviously, the first type of anthropological evolution, through alchemical sexual cooperation, would initiate its development when it is duly comprehended in each and every aspect. The second type of anthropological evolution is different. Unquestionably, in the beginning the human race multiplied themselves as cells multiply. We know very well that within the living cell its nucleus is divided in two. The living cell specializes in issuing a determined quantity of cytoplasm and inherent material in order to form new cells. The two, in their time, divide into another two. Thus, by means of the falciparous process of cellular division, the cells multiply, and thus the organism develops, etc. In the beginning, the androgynous humans divided themselves in two in order to reproduce themselves. Later on that changed. The human organism had to become prepared, through evolution, in order for it to reproduce by means of sexual cooperation. Obviously, it was in Lemuria, the continent situated in aforetime in the Indian Ocean, where the principal events related with reproduction through sexual cooperation were verified. In the beginning, the creative organs, the lingam yoni, were not completely developed. It was necessary for these organs of the human species to be totally crystallized and developed, so that later on in time the reproduction of the human species by means of sexual cooperation could be concretely performed. Thus, while the masculine-feminine sexual organs became completely developed, many extremely interesting events from the biological and psychosomatic point of view were verified. These biological events did not occur in the merely androgynous humans, but instead they occurred within the hermaphroditic human being. The cell atom was detached from the father-mother's organism in order to be developed and fully grown. Then, as a consequence or corollary, by means of very delicate processes, a new creature developed. The second aspect of this process of multiplication was remarkably peculiar. If it is true that in the beginning living human seeds were detached as an atomic radiation in order to be externally developed and in order to become new creatures, then afterwards, in the second aspect, a certain favorable change was verified. We know that normally each month the feminine sex eliminates an ovum from her ovaries. Yet, in the hermaphroditic father-mother this ovum had a certain extraordinary consistency. It was already an egg in itself, in its intrinsic structure. It was an internally fecundated egg by the father-mother. It was an internally fecundated egg within the hermaphrodite. When the egg came out to the external world, it was developed or incubated until it finally opened and a new creature sprang forth from it. This new creature was nourished with the breasts of the father-mother. This is factually very important. Much later in time, it was noticeable that certain creatures were coming into existence with one sexual organ more developed than the other. Finally, the moment arrived when humanity was divided into opposite sexes. When this occurred, sexual cooperation became necessary in order to create and to create anew. The genealogies of Haeckel with respect to the possible origin of the human being and our three primordial races do not fit within materialistic anthropology, which in this day and age is invading the world. Regrettably, Haeckel's genealogies are the motive for laughter for conventional anthropologists who are enemies of the divine. Generally, they even mock the genealogy of Haeckel as well as other kinds of genealogies, such as that mentioned by Homer. Let us remember Achilles, the illustrious warrior, son of Mars, and Agamemnon, son of Jupiter, the one who commands from afar, etc. These are phrases or poetic words of that man who in former times sang to ancient Troy and to the rage of Achilles the warrior. We must speak clearly in this anthropological disquisition. It is obvious that the scientists of this epoch will have to decide if they are with Paracelsus, the father of chemistry, or if they follow the mythological folly of Haeckel. Anyhow, there is so much that we must acquire within the exclusively anthropological field. If the division of the living cell as well as the primordial or primeval reproductive process would be denied, then as a fact the reproduction of Haeckel's monera or atom from the aqueous abyss that divided itself asunder in order to be multiplied must also be denied. Indeed, science cannot in any way pronounce itself against the primeval falciparous act of reproduction, which is the reproductive system by means of cellular division. Nevertheless, we are aware that these two theories about the way in which the reproduction of human species started are very arguable and thorny, namely reproduction of the human species before initiating the possible sexual cooperation when the creative organs were still in the process of development, and the reproduction of human species through sexual cooperation. All the religious theogonies, starting with the very ancient Orphic up until the Christian Bible's theogony, state a beginning by means of sexual cooperation, yet in a purely symbolic way. Those statements could be repeated by means of alchemy, but never in a scientific, anthropological way. When the creative sexual organs have not yet been created, an evolving process cannot start through sexual cooperation. Obviously, in order to fecundate through sexual cooperation, there had to be a period of preparation. This had to have been a period through which the creative organs were developed and unfolded in the organic physiology of the human being. The religious scriptures from the East as well as from the West have been adulterated, except the Vishnu Purana. For example, in this scripture it is stated that before human beings were endowed with the capacity of reproducing themselves through sexual cooperation, or long before human beings could have that capacity, specifically before sexual cooperation between men and women existed, other ways of reproduction existed. This refers to former stages, previous to the formation of the creative organs in the human being. We do not want to reach the point of affirming that those former systems, previous to sexual cooperation, did not have any relation with the sexual creative energy. We know that the sexual energy in itself has other forms of manifestation. Thus, Before the creative organs were developed in the human species, the sexual energy had other ways of expression in order to create. It is pitiful that the sacred scriptures of all religions have been adulterated. We understand that even the Edda generated a little alteration in the Pentateuch of the Hebraic Bible. Anyhow, it is indispensable that we continue analyzing and meditating upon where the distinct races were developed. We have stated many times before that the theory about the Pithecus Noah is absurd. So is the cyanocephalus with a tail, the monkey without a tail, and the arboreal man. These are merely utopian matters that do not have any type of foundation. We have already laughed about the silly theory of Haeckel that depicts a species of primate, something like a silly missing link between the ape and the human being, with the capacity of speaking. However, it is necessary to know where these races were developed, in which scenario these evolutions and devolutions of humans unfolded. This is what we need to know because it would be impossible to disconnect the human races from their environment, from their distinct continents, from their islands, from their mountains, and from their natural scenarios. It draws our attention to the fact that even though there were many varieties of animals during the Mesozoic era and later became extinct, humanity is still very much alive. All of those animals have already disappeared from the face of the earth. How is this possible? How is it that all the antediluvian monsters have disappeared, yet humanity continues to live on? We have made much emphasis on this statement, because it is indispensable to reflect a little about it. It cannot be denied that the human being is related to his environment. It cannot be denied that there were other forms of reproduction distinct from those of sexual cooperation. Therefore, it is convenient to know something about the environment in which all the different races were developed. It is urgent that we study the distinct scenarios of nature little by little. We do not deny, in any way, that there are many facts that conventional anthropologists truly do not know. What do they know about the changes or modifications of the axis of the Earth in relation to the obliquity of the ecliptic? 1. Laplace, the one who invented a famous theory that still exists in this day and age, affirmed that all worlds emerge from their correspondent nebulas, a theory that has never been proven. He even fanatically stated that the declination of the axis of the Earth in relation with the obliquity of the ecliptic is almost null. He stated that it has always been like that, always in a secular form. Unquestionably, geology, up to a certain point, is against these former concepts of astronomy. Evidently, the deviation of the axis of the Earth within the obliquity of the ecliptic, or to be more specific, the inclination, indicates glacial periods that always occur throughout the ages. If we deny the glacial periods, then we are affirming incoherent things, because glaciations are completely proven. The cause of these glaciations is the deviation of the axis of the Earth on its inclination within the obliquity of the ecliptic. The former deviation, which astronomers deny, is demonstrated with certainty by means of geological studies. Proof of tremendous glaciations exists. Already, Magellan wrote about certain epochs of heat or tropic within the Arctic, simultaneously accompanied by glaciations and intense cold. We will conclude by stating that, regarding this investigation, conventional geology and astronomy are now in disagreement. We have arrived to a very special subject matter, the glaciations. It seems incredible that at other times in the south of Europe and in the north of Africa there have been terrible glaciations. In Spain, for instance, they know through accounts of the Silurian period that there were gigantic glaciations there. This is demonstrated by means of the studies of paleontology. No one can deny in this day and age that mummified cadavers of antediluvian animals have been discovered in Siberia and especially at the mouth of certain rivers like the Obi or Ub and others. This signifies that Siberia, which is so cold, was in other times a tropic with great heat. This is also true for Greenland, the peninsula of Scandinavia, Suez, Norway, Iceland, and all those horseshoe-shaped lands that totally surround the North Pole. What? There was great heat in those regions? Impossible, everybody would say, yet paleontology has confirmed it. Precisely, very interesting creatures have been discovered at the mouth of the river Obi. This invites us to reflect. During the times of Atlantis, the North and South Poles were not located where they are now. The North Pole, the Arctic, was located over the equatorial zone on the most eastern point of Africa and Antarctica. The South Pole was exactly located over the same equatorial line, on the opposite side, in a specific place in the Pacific Ocean. Therefore, there were great changes in the terrestrial globe's physiognomy. True ancient maps are known by the sages of this present epoch. Maps of the ancient Earth, geographic charts that demonstrate that our world had another physiognomy in the past, are in the secret crypts of the lamas in the Himalayan mountains. Let us think about Lemuria, about that gigantic continent located long ago in the Indian Ocean. It was united to Australia, because Australia was part of Lemuria, and likewise so was Oceania. The Arctic was located in the most eastern point, over the equatorial line of Africa, then everything was different, distinct. A gigantic glaciation occurred during that epoch. That glaciation was projected precisely from the Arctic Pole, located in Africa, towards Arabia, that is to say, towards the southeast of Asia. Moreover, it almost covered Lemuria completely. That entire zone was covered by ice, but it did not manage to pass into the Mediterranean. It is intriguing to know that there are epochs in which our planet Earth passed through glaciations, epochs in which the ice invaded certain zones, epochs in which millions of creatures died. All of this, indeed, happens because of the inclination of the axis of the Earth in relation to the obliquity of the ecliptic. The human being has had to develop himself in different scenarios, and we must deeply know what those scenarios are. How did America emerge? How did Europe appear? How did Lemuria sink? How did Atlantis disappear? Lemuria was accepted by Darwin. Lemuria still exists at the bottom of the Indian Ocean. Obviously, the organisms have passed through different morphological changes, in these or those environments. If we were to state, as the present materialistic anthropologists abundantly state, namely that the intellectual animal mistakenly called a human being has the famous mouse, or better said, the runcho, or mouse which is cited by the South American people as his ancestor, then frankly we would adulterate the truth. We know very well that such an enormous mouse or runcho from South America comes from the Atlantis of Plato. We also know that before Atlantis came into existence, the human being already existed. Therefore, the existence of the human being predates the famous Atlantean runcho. If we would affirm that the human being originally came from certain primates and later on from certain hominids from the ancient land of Lemuria, which was so accepted by Darwin, then we would also adulterate reality. Because before the simians came into existence and a long time before the so boasted primates and hominids appeared on the earth, the human being already existed. The human being already existed long before the reproduction of human species was developed through sexual cooperation. So, the human being is very much prior to Lemuria itself, before the Lemuria that was so accepted by Darwin. We have to recognize that materialistic anthropologists have been studying this human race in a very superficial way, because this human race that has passed from monolithic times through the Eocene, Miocene, and Pliocene epochs is more ancient than the continents of Lemuria and Atlantis. Yet, it is necessary to continue studying the scenarios of our world in order to better comprehend the diverse processes of evolution and devolution of the different human races. Meanwhile, I just want to state that the Gnostics are firm in their concepts. Therefore, if they have to choose between Paracelsus, the father of modern chemistry, and Haeckel as the famous creator of the silly mythic anthropoid, frankly they will resolve themselves to the great sage Paracelsus. Chapter 7. The inhabitants of the planet Earth still do not know the world in which they live. However, incongruently, they want to travel to other worlds. Indeed, the planet Earth deserves to be profoundly studied. Diverse facts, events, phenomena, completely unknown to conventional science, are found on the entire planet. It is not irrelevant to consider some events that take place within the seas. Let us begin by describing some reminiscences about certain phenomena related to some of the creatures in the oceans. In August 1917, a marine serpent that measured 27 meters in length was observed off the coast of Cape Ann, Massachusetts, USA. The Naturalist Society of Boston observed it in detail. Unfortunately, it was never again seen in those places. While on a tugboat, the oceanographer Danes Anton Brunn observed the capture of a tadpole, in a larval state, that measured 2 meters in length. According to naturalist studies, if this tadpole would have developed, it would have reached 22 meters in length. Anyhow, the above-mentioned are two types of unknown creatures. Yet, how do they live? How do they behave? Where do they develop? Why do they exist? Let us think about a famous blue fish that was considered to be extinct. This blue fish has always been referred to in a poetic way. Its peculiar name reminds us of a canto, of poetry. Its name is coelacanth. This strange little animal has extremities similar to those of human beings. It lives in the depths of the Indian Ocean. It existed in Lemuria. This indicates that even now, in this day and age, that fish continues to inhabit the same sunken Lemuria. It lives in the profundities of the ocean and very seldom does it surface. Unquestionably, the great profundities of the Indian Ocean are extraordinary. The existence of an antediluvian animal during this century is something that makes us think quite a bit. Why does it still exist? What is the reason for it? When the fossilized remnant of a coelacanth was found, scientists calculated it to be 18 million years old. The coelacanth was very well known 70 million years ago. The figure of the coelacanth is astonishing. Our attention is called to its residual extremities. Its limbs are developed similar to the arms, the hands, or the feet of human beings. It still exists, and it is perfectly alive. How is it that an antediluvian creature still lives in the final decades of the 20th century? What could the materialistic anthropologists state about an animal such as this? What concepts would they have about it? All of this invites us to a great deal of reflection. Indeed, what could be stated about the ichthyosaurs of archaic times? This animal still continues to exist in the terrible profundities of the Pacific Ocean. What do the scientists know about it? Scientists know absolutely nothing about it at all. Thus, it is convenient for us to continue exploring all these subject matters in order to attain clear concepts about them. The case of the eels is certainly very special. Some eels from Europe and America meet in the Sargasso Sea with the purpose of reproducing. What is intriguing is the fact that the ones that return to that original point of departure are not the parents, but rather their offspring. Why does this phenomenon occur? Why do the parents not return, but instead their offspring? Can the anthropologists of false science explain this phenomenon? What do they know about this subject matter? I am sure that they totally ignore these matters. Let us study the case of the tuna fish. This is something that indeed deserves to be reflected upon. The tuna leave Brazil and swim towards Scotland. Subsequently, they approach Europe and pass close to the Mediterranean Sea. Yet, it is rare for the tuna to swim into the Mediterranean Sea. What could scientists say about this phenomenon? Why don't the migratory currents of tuna enter into the Mediterranean Sea? Who guides them? Why do they do it? When have the gentlemen of materialistic anthropology defined these wonders? During which epoch? If they pretend to own the wisdom of the universe, then why have they not spoken about this matter? These materialistic people do not only ignore, but they ignore that they ignore, and this is very critical. There are large squids, gigantic monsters endowed with enormous tentacles, but retarded science has never spoken about them. 1. The size of these squids can be calculated based on the skeletons that are occasionally found. Prints of their gigantic tentacles have been found on the backs of whales. Unquestionably, the squid's tentacles suck the pigmentation out of whales' skin and leave their print. Those prints reveal their titanic fights in the profundities of the ocean. There are alligator fish, or ichthyosaurs of unknown origin, that pseudo-anthropology has never commented about. Continuing ahead, we will also speak of certain phenomena that are unknown to those materialistic gentlemen. We know that deep down within the sea, hundreds of meters within its profundity, there are rivers that run in opposite directions. Why do they do it? Why does a river that runs close by another river circulate in an opposite direction and yet within the same ocean? The rivers of the north circulate from left to right as do the needles of a clock. They circulate clockwise. The rivers of the south circulate inversely, counterclockwise. Why does the current of Bengal not rotate? What is happening? What explanation can pseudoscience give us? Why are the scientists speechless about these points? What can they tell us about this matter? On the coasts of Peru, about 1,500 meters in profundity, engraved columns have been observed among cyclopean buildings. Magnificent photographs have been taken of them. Thus, the existence of Lemuria is demonstrated. Yet the foolish scientists continue as always, denying and denying. In this day and age, there are civilizations that have disappeared, like the one found on Easter Island. There are monumental effigies, enormous human heads chiseled by titanic hands. However, materialistic science has never said anything. It is only speechless, dumb, silent. What would we say about Antarctica? There is no doubt that there was a powerful civilization at the North and South Poles prior to the revolutions of axis of the Earth. Undoubtedly, within the ice of Antarctica, remnants of those very ancient cultures must still exist. The day will arrive when an archaeologist's shovel will uncover them. Meanwhile, present science does not give any explanations. There are gigantic waves in tranquil and serene seas. These are isolated waves that have no reason for being. We are referring to those waves that are called seiche. What is their origin? Are they caused by some underwater earthquake? How can these gentlemen, the materialistic scientists, explain this? What would the enemies of the Eternal One say about it? That there are waves in the boisterous seas, yes, we accept this, but that an isolated, gigantic and monstrous wave emerges all of a sudden in a tranquil sea without any known reason is something that has never had a scientific explanation. Nonetheless, such facts occur within the ocean and the materialists do not explain them. Hundreds of thousands of earthquakes occur in the underwater mountain range at the center of the Atlantic Ocean where the continent of Atlantis formerly existed. Let us remember that terrible earthquakes and great seaquakes finished off the Atlantean continent. Even in this day and age, the trembling continues in the submerged Atlantis. It is convenient to reflect upon all of these themes, since in their depth they are abundantly intriguing. Indeed, the materialistic anthropologists do not know the Earth. This planet continues to be a true enigma for them. The spiked lobsters reunite in appreciable quantities in order to migrate. They then descend to the continental platform and then proceed towards the abysmal flatness to an unknown destiny. What do the presumed wise men say about this? What explanations do they give? Where do these lobsters go? What is their exact destination? Why do they perform these types of migrations? Enigmas that the learned ignoramuses do not understand. The Earth was not always as it is now. Its physiological physiognomy has changed many times. If we examine W. Scott Elliott's 4 maps, we will observe that the Earth was completely different 1 million years ago. Those 4 geographical maps deserve to be taken into consideration. They are similar to the 4 maps that are in some subterranean crypts in Central Asia. Those maps are unknown to the all-knowing ignoramuses of materialistic science. These maps are secretly kept with the purpose of preserving them intact, because the gentlemen of conventional anthropology are always willing to alter everything with the goal of justifying their much-boasted theories. The first of these maps from W. Scott Elliott calls our attention. It is very intriguing. On it we see how the world was 800,000 years BC. Then, the region of the brachycephalus of this present ultramodern precarious anthropology did not exist. On those W. Scott Elliott maps, we can see that the Bering Strait did not exist as it is today. The only thing that existed was water that covered Siberia and Europe all the way to France and Germany. These lands were submerged in the depths of the oceans. Africa, we can also observe, had only the eastern part because the west and the south were both submerged within the boisterous waves of the ocean. On those maps was a small continent in eastern Africa that was known at that time with the name of Grabonski. South America was submerged within the waters of the ocean. The United States, Canada, and Alaska were also submerged within the ocean. Nevertheless, on those maps the land of Mexico existed. It seems incredible that 800,000 years BC Mexico already existed. Europe still had not appeared and Mexico already existed. When South America had not yet emerged from within the depths of the ocean, Mexico already existed. This invites us to comprehend that within the entrails of the sacred land of Anahuac, Mexico, which is as archaic as the world, there are archaeological and esoteric treasures which have still not yet been discovered by archaeologists. In that epoch, Lemuria was a gigantic continent extending throughout the Pacific Ocean, covering the whole area of Australia, Oceania, and the Indian Ocean. Lemuria extended itself throughout the Pacific Ocean, reaching those coastal places where much later South America would emerge. Lemuria was monumental, enormous. Thus, the physiognomy of this terrestrial globe was completely different 800,000 years BC. The capital of Atlantis was Toyon, the city of the 7 doors of massive gold. The materialistic anthropologists who cannot see beyond their noses might ask, on what do we base ourselves, speaking about the great capital of Atlantis? I want to tell these gentlemen, who have worked a great deal in order to take the eternal values away from humanity, who have precipitated it down into the devolving path, that there are maps preserved in secrecy in subterranean crypts. These maps indicate where Toyon, the capital of Atlantis, was situated. Therefore, if we talk, we do it with complete knowledge. If we locate Lemuria and Atlantis, it is because they were continents that really existed. Toyon was situated on an angle, on the southeastern part of that great country. It faced the southeast coast of a strip of land that visibly extended until the lower in the Mediterranean Sea and towards eastern Africa. Its confines reached southern Asia, which already existed. Atlantis extended itself from Brazil to the Azores and from Nova Scotia straight down throughout the whole Atlantic Ocean. Thus, Atlantis totally covered the ocean that bears its name. It was a great continental country. Imagine Atlantis extending itself from the Azores up to Nova Scotia and then descending towards present-day Brazil. How enormous that continent was! It extended from south to north. It was colossal. Yet, it sank through means of many earthquakes. Various catastrophes were necessary in order for Atlantis to definitively disappear. The scenario of the world has changed very often. The physiognomy of this terrestrial globe has not always been the same. Different human races have been developed upon it. We need to carefully study the physiognomy of the world of ancient times, the different geological changes through which the earth has passed. Thus, only in this way can we form a precise concept about the origin of the human being and its diverse cultures. Only in this way can we form a precise concept of its diverse evolving and devolving processes. However, if we unfortunately remain completely bottled up within all of the contemporary prejudices, we will not be able to know anything about geology, much less about the development of the human race. It is necessary to acquire, to investigate, and to analyze. There are many enigmas on the face of the earth that are unknown to conventional science. How is it possible that the ichthyosaurs that endured for epochs, like during the Pliocene, continue to exist in this present century in the great profundities of the Pacific Ocean? Until now, these enigmas cannot be deciphered by the illustrious materialists, nor can they comprehend them. Through these lessons, we must get to know the different scenarios of the world. We have to make light within darkness. Thus, by stating the scientific foundations of Gnostic anthropology, we will then be able to review all ancient cultures. It is necessary to know how the Pelasgians appeared in Europe. It is necessary to know about the archaic cultures. It is urgent to know something about the Hyperborean civilization, etc. Yet, first of all, it is urgent to review the different geological changes that the Earth has passed through. We comprehend that each root race has had its own scenario. We need to know the environment, climate, and the conditions that each root race had in order to be able to live. This is indispensable. When materialistic anthropology states that the American cultures came from the Asiatic continent by means of the Bering Strait, indeed they are asserting a frightful mendacity, because ancient maps show that in ancient times the Bering Strait, Siberia, Canada, and the United States did not exist. Mexico had a solemn, marvelous population that was separated from the Bering Strait by the great oceans of that time. Therefore, materialistic science is talking about something that they have not seen, that they cannot prove. We are stating these facts based on maps such as those of W. Scott Elliott and other similar maps which are found in the subterranean crypts of the Himalayan mountain range in Central Asia. People who asseverate that the human race reached America through the Bering Strait are showing a great deal of ignorance, a total unknowingness of ancient geographic charts. Materialistic anthropologists are cheating the public with their types of assertions. This is how they insult the intelligence of readers. We repeat, we love scientific investigation and exact analysis. We do not allow ourselves the luxury of accepting materialistic theories. We are not witless people who would allow ourselves to be cheated by superstitions based on false utopias. We have geographic charts, and we are sure that the readers of this book will comprehend our position very well. The readers will comprehend all of this even better when they study the aforementioned geographic charts, which were displayed at the Third Gnostic International Congress in Caracas, Venezuela. That Congress took place August 11th to 19th in the year 1978. Inferential peace.